Potentia Wealth brings you the Power of Wealthness podcast.
Long before cloud computing, before smartphones, before technology became the backbone of everyday life, there were a handful of visionaries who saw where technology and the world was going. They believe information would one day power business, shape economies, and transform how we live and work every day. One of those visionaries is our guest today. Edward Oates is a co-founder of Oracle, a company that helped build the modern database revolution, and a proud alumnus of San Jose State University. His journey is not just a story of technological innovation, but of risk, perseverance, and the mindset required to create something that truly changes the world. Today, we'll talk about what it takes to build a lasting success, and how wellness and clarity influence performance at the highest levels, and how our definition of wealth evolves over a lifetime of achievement. Ed, welcome to the Power of Wealthness.
Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me here.
Let's take you back to your time at San Jose State. What was it like for you at San Jose State and college, and what were your ambitions at the time?
Well, my college story is more than San Jose State. I did a summer session when I was a high school junior at UCSB, and I was going to be a math and physics major, and that was fine. And then I got accepted to Berkeley in 1964, and that was the beginning of the free speech movement and being away from home. And that does not do well for a 17 or 18-year-old boy. So I came back, went to West Valley Junior College to make up those credits, and then went to San Jose State for all of my upper division stuff. San Jose State was a very different place then than it is now. It was pretty much a commuter college. The 7th Street ran all the way through the middle of campus, San Carlos went in front of Macquarie Hall. And I would guess 70% or more of the students were commuting students. So at nighttime, place shut down.
That didn't change much between the time you were there and the time that I was there. So there was still active streets running through San Jose State. It was still a commuter school. So It's changed a lot in the last 20 years for sure.
And the town of San Jose in that area changed. There was nothing there. And the bus station was the hub of activity, I think. But nobody went off campus to do anything. It was everything on campus, you went home. But my time at San Jose State, I was a math major, a physics major for a semester, and said, I don't want to do physics. I want to do math and computer stuff. No such thing as computer science in those days. But I didn't know what I wanted to do with a math degree, but I liked math and I was pretty good at it. And it gave me room to do a broader based education, because if you're physics, chemistry, a science major like that, you take all the same math you do as a math major, and then a bunch of other classes that have to do with physics. And by taking the physics stuff out of that, I was able to take a much broader education. I was a philosophy minor. When I went there, I took a bunch of literature, took, music history courses, just what I like to call a broad-based education, more of a classical education without the language. I didn't take Greek. But other than that, so I enjoyed college. I was not a great student. I was much more interested in music, and basically playing in a rock band and all that kind of stuff. And because there was essentially no social life on campus, everything I did with music happened off campus.
So you had as you say, a broad education, as did I. I loved learning. I was not an A student as well. And I really enjoyed, I took the sociology, geology, I took anything with an ology at the end of it, psychology, loved all of that stuff. So did you have a particular ambition? Did you know that you were going to do something big that would change the world in the future at that point?
No, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with this math degree. I figured, well, I'd be a statistician, or I'd maybe get a master's degree in something, but it was like, I did not really know. Tech was not a thing. So I think, well, maybe I'll go to work for IBM or somebody like that. I didn't really think about being a computer programmer. That didn't happen until the last semester of my senior year. Though I was always interested in computers. I built a computer when I was a freshman in high school, a little analog computer, but I still, got interested in that, but I didn't know computer languages. So I didn't really know what I was going to do with that going forward. So it was a day-by-day thing.
Did your experience at San Jose State kind of shape your work ethic or mindset or any of that prepared you for the future?
Yeah, I think it's true of San Jose State. I think it's true of a lot of schools and a lot of students. You have to develop time budgeting, especially after my experience at Cal. I said, I have to budget for fun stuff. I have to budget for learning stuff that's fun and then learning stuff that just work. And so that it taught me a lot about time budgeting and that you have to get certain things done, whether you like to or not. And often those time deadlines and budgets are imposed from the outside, that it's not all whatever you feel like doing right now.
It works best when you can put those two together.
Yeah.
How did you go from your education then to Oracle? What was the transition there?
There was only one computer class at San Jose State at the time. And there was the same class in Engineering 50 or Math 144. It was called computer programming. And the intent of those classes was to do numerical analysis using Fortran, which is an old computer language which still exists in some places, but that's that and assembly language are the first languages I learned at college. But the professor, he was an associate professor who taught my class, really wanted it to be computer science, not using computers to solve math problems. And that was really interesting. So he did the obligatory, least common divisor kind of problem. But he taught us about computers, how computers are structured, what a CPU is, what memory is, what a von Neumann machine is, all this kind of stuff that wasn't in the regular part of that curriculum. And in fact, he was a researcher at a company called Singer Business Machines, with the Singer sewing machine people, but there was a conglomerate at the time. And they had a research center in Palo Alto, which eventually became Palo Alto Research Center for Xerox PARC. And so he hired me out of that class because I did really well in computer programming. I really liked it. It was just, this is fun and it's easy. You get kind of immediate feedback. Your program works or it doesn't, kind of a thing. So he hired me to work at that research center, and I learned more about computer science there, and decided that systems programming, not application programming. I didn't want to write payroll programs. I didn't want to write, Apollo mission simulator kinds of things. Though my second job after that was at Link Simulators. Link made aircraft simulations, and they did the Apollo mission simulator. And so I worked on that for a little bit, but also worked on nuclear reactor simulation for one of their big projects. But one of the things that they had to do, I worked on neutron kinetics and all this math stuff, which was fine, but they had to keep track of, about 2,000 variables and what equations used what parts of the program used something else. And they said, we need some data thing that will keep this stuff. Well, let me do that. Let me come up with a little data program that can do basically a symbol dictionary. So you can look up, neutron speed, whatever the symbol name was. And I say, here's all the equations to use that. Here's where it's used in the simulation. And I wrote a program in a language called PL1, which is now, it still exists, but it's kind of defunct, to basically keep track of all this data and, relate the data to one piece to the other. My own little invention. I didn't know the thing like databases existed, and they kind of didn't. So I put that whole thing together, including all the access methods and how to randomize it, all that kind of stuff. So that was my first experience with data, and I kind of liked that. The next step in my transition was I got drafted in the U.S. Army because it was during the Vietnam War. Fortunately, they didn't send me anywhere that people were shooting, other than they did send me to Washington, D.C., so one could argue at the time that it was more dangerous in D.C. than Vietnam.
Yeah, I'm not sure it was much safer there.
Yeah. Well, but the project they put me on was the enlisted master database, and so basically a list of basically a database on tape of all the people in the enlisted part of the Army, about almost 2 million people at the time.
Wow.
And the officer database, which is smaller, it's a couple 100,000. But we had to keep track of all this stuff on tape, and so I learned about tape databases and what it takes to search the database, to edit the data coming in, garbage in, garbage out. And one of my responsibilities was dealing with the garbage in problem. All these transactions coming in from the field. If you're, a data processing person, you're running, Fort Lewis, Washington or something, you have to submit these 80-column cards with, this guy came in, he's completed basic training, he was sick for 2 weeks, all this kind of stuff. Those data has to come in. And so the data had to be edited to make sure it was accurate and before it could be applied to the database, which is these 40 reels of tape. And that was fun, looking at, the garbage in, garbage out problem. And one of my claims to fame in the Army just was we had a problem with a lot of garbage data coming, especially from Vietnam. And understand, these guys are under fire, they're busy, they just dash off these things, they're full of errors. So how do we get these what are called data processing activities, DPAs, to be more accurate? And I said, well, the thing that people don't like is having their command, their name, whatever, show up in a negative way. So why don't I build a program that will display in a graphical way the error rates that they're experiencing, and will categorize it by DPA, data processing activity, and do a nice little graph of this stuff, so that and scale the graph so the guy with the worst error rate had a full length bar.
Huh.
So it went up to the top. Even if there's only 2 errors, it got full length. And so I did this program, and they distributed it. They accepted it. Our commanding general thought this was a good idea, and so he made everybody use this program. And then they distributed these reports out to the other generals who ran these commands that had these DPAs. No general wants his name associated with the worst record in the Army for anything. And our error rates fell by 87%.
Wow.
And they gave me an Army Commendation Medal for this silly thing. And I thought it was hilarious. Basically, here's this, I was a specialist 5th class embarrassing generals to do the right thing. So
motivating generals to do the right thing.
Yeah, it really worked. And that taught me something a little bit about organizational psychology and motivations, and how you get people to do things without hammering them over the head. You do something more subtle.
So you took that Army experience and you moved on to what?
Singer hired me afterwards in San Leandro, where they had a research facility, and we were building computers. There was a computer called the Singer 10, which Sears and Roebuck used. And back in the 70s, everyone went to Sears and Roebuck, had these space age looking cash register, this Swoopy design and all that kind of stuff. And that's what Singer built those. And we were building all the follow-on computer, the back end, called System 11. What a clever name, after 10. And so we were building all the software, building operating systems and disk drivers. And I latched on to, because we wanted to have an access method. IBM had a thing called ISAM, Index Sequential Access Method. And we thought that was kind of primitive. So why don't we build something that can organize the data and have keywords so you could find the record you wanted. So I want somebody with, social security number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you could put that in and find a way to find it really quickly in this particular database. It was only one index on particular files, but I built that entire access method for Singer at the time, and it worked. And so I also built the hardware drivers for all the disk drivers and all that kind of stuff. So I learned a lot about accessing data, and because it really, wasn't much out there. I mean, other than what I mentioned, ISAM, Index Sequential Access Method, there really wasn't anything. There were no databases. If you were, say you were running payroll and you wanted to get a list of all the employees who failed to turn in their time cards, you had to write a custom program to do that and submit it to the IT group, who would then write the program, schedule it to run. So 6 months later, you get the data, which is kind of obsolete by that time. So I thought that was, kind of unusual to have to do that. But I wrote this little thing which helped or at least potential customers. Singer eventually went out of business doing that kind of business, that kind of work. But it was going to help people using COBOL compilers be able to find records, because COBOL is a common business-oriented language built by Grace Hopper, U.S. Navy Admiral. She was promoted to Admiral. She was the founder of kind of English language programs for commercial use as opposed to scientific use, which is Fortran. So she's one of my idols. And she worked for the U.S. Navy, which was I learned a lot about software engineering from all the projects they did. So I went from there to Ampex, which is where I met Larry Ellis and Bob Miner. And we were, again, doing kind of a database-y thing for a project for the CIA, which was codenamed Oracle, which is where the name of the company came from.
That's fun.
And we were working this kind of network database access method for them and for NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado, which is the project I was working on. So I went out to Colorado and worked on Cray 1, which was one of the early supercomputers.
Yep.
And
Remember the craze?
and CDC 6600s and a 7600. So we built all the software to run the database, which was on tape, but it was specialized tape, 2 inches wide. It's called the Terabit project. But when trillion bits was a lot. Your watch has more than that, just probably in the thing which displays the dial. But nonetheless, but we immediately started thinking that there's got to be a better way to run a company than just based upon, the one who has the most seniority, is kind of calling the shots, not necessarily the smartest one. So we decided we were going to form our own company at some point, and we had a good excuse to do that at some point with a company called Precision Instrument, which has also built a mass storage device like Ampex was building, and they needed software. There's a bunch of engineers with lasers to build holes and rhodium strips and things like that, and we didn't care about that. But they had a big device that dealt with this stuff, but they needed a database, they needed device drivers, all that stuff. So we formed a company to do this software for that particular thing. So that was our seed mode. We had no venture capital. Nobody would invest in a software enterprise in any case because you couldn't copyright or patent. You could copyright software, you couldn't patent it. And there was no intellectual property protection around that stuff. And most companies gave away their software anyway. You bought an IBM computer, you got compilers, you got the ISAM access method, you got all kinds of stuff. Just it was thrown into the hardware. So it wasn't considered a significant piece of what people had. So we kind of set out to not necessarily change that, but we said, well, if IBM's giving it, how about many computer companies, Digital Equipment Corporation, Data General? And so once we built this piece of custom software on a PDP-11, which is primarily used for industrial and scientific use, and we said, we can do commercial stuff with this. So we built that custom project for them and immediately said, we want to build a real database. There were like 3 database companies in the world at the time. Syncom Total, their MRI 2000, and one other whose name slips my mind, Database. But they were all written for mainframes. They weren't really hard to use. They weren't using the latest technology in database, which IBM had pioneered. And they would specify a system called System R for relational. And there was a lot of papers about relational database, especially from a guy named David Childs out of the University of Michigan. And this is kind of interesting, but IBM put it together as a system, and they wrote a paper in Santa Teresa down here at San Jose. And a side note, the main author on that paper was a guy I went to high school with. And he went to Harvey Mudd, and he was 4 years ahead of me, but I knew him briefly. A guy named Dave Chamberlain. But at any rate, so he was the primary author, but they invented the SQL language, which we all use in database now. And the whole kind of underpinnings of what a relational database should look like, based upon some works by Ted Codd and Chris Dade. They both wrote books about all this stuff. And we read these books, but I found this paper, and I presented it to Larry and Bob. I said, if we built data, we should build this because we don't have to market. No marketing required. IBM's doing all the marketing for this. And IBM was the big kid on the block. And there was a saying at the time, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. And we said, that's cool. We'll let them buy IBM, but we're not going to build us on mainframes because we're way too small for that. So we're going to build it on mini computers, that PDP-11 I talked about. And we'll use Unix and also the operating system that came from Digital Equipment Corporation at the time. And, DEC was the number 2 computer company at the time.
Yeah.
And so we decided to build it in that environment, much more tolerant environment, and mostly for departmental computing, not necessarily for corporate-wide, gargantuan databases, because we weren't ready for that. We knew we weren't ready for that. We had no idea how to sell it in that environment. So we started building that database and used the money from that contract I mentioned earlier with Precision Instrument to fund ourselves. So, our total investment when we started the company personally was $2,000 for all of us. So we had no venture capital, but we had no business expertise. So about 2.5 years in, we said, we don't know anything about business. Let's get some venture capital people in there. We don't need their money. We need their expertise and their contacts. So we went to a guy named Don Lucas, not the car guy, but the venture capital guy on Sand Hill Road. And he had kind of noticed this because that's where our offices were at the time. And we got him interested in giving us advice, brought him in as chairman of the board. We were a corporation from day one, and got enough venture money in that we had some interest from that community to help us build our business, basically business development.
As you start off, you're a true startup company. And as you're building through that into the large company that Oracle is today, how were you guys making your critical business decisions? How did that work?
I mean, we were basically, the three of us, we had to basically agree on everything. So it was, we were the committee that did that work. We didn't know a lot about business, but for example, when we decided to build System R, we said, well, that's a good thing. And we had decided for all the right reasons. We made other business decisions. Let's make it portable. Let's make sure it just doesn't run on PV11. So let's make sure we can separate out the pieces that are really dependent upon the hardware and the operating system from the actual database piece. So that's one of Oracle's claims to fame. We were on 150 different computers at one point. So we designed that. We have a user interface. We did all those things. The business decisions, like to go out and get some venture capital, it was a group decision. But I think the big thing that helped us, we had a philosophy of how to build a business. And one of the things was, don't outspend your cash flow. There was a cash flow. We said, if we don't have the money, don't buy that bigger office. Don't get those extra desks, whatever it is. Don't hire people in anticipation that you might need them next year. It's kind of on-demand hiring. Kind of the economic principle of, just in time. That's how we ran things.
Sure.
And the other thing was, it was a personnel decision. How do we hire people? Just because you have an empty chair doesn't mean you want to put any old warm body in that chair. As we had broken the world into what we call three categories of workers. We use programmers because that's what we were. It's super programmers. These guys and gals were 10 times more productive than anybody else. They're the stars. We had journeymen, people, they did good work. And then we had the negative performers and negative programmers. They did work that had to be fixed, but it was always, by the time you figured out that they broke something seriously, you couldn't get the journeymen to do it because they couldn't work fast enough. So you had to divert the super programmers to go fix that problem. So we said, let's structure a company. Don't hire any negative workers. Hire as many super programmers as you can, and you have to have some regular workers as well. But always be looking at your workforce and basically ranking everybody from best to worst. And you have to, I started to ask the question, do we need these bottom 10% in our employ? And we often would, not often, but when we needed to, we'd give those people the right to be successful elsewhere.
Yeah, well, I understand that.
And often they were. People would go out of Oracle, go somewhere else, and they're pretty successful there. So we were pretty demanding. We got a reputation for being kind of jerks about it, but we wanted to have kind of only the best.
So looking back, what mattered most in achieving that success? Was it timing, talent, perseverance, something else?
Certainly timing. We started Oracle the same year, or the year after Apple started in 76. We started in 77. Microsoft started in 77. So it was kind of a miracle year for those three companies that became. There were other companies out there were starting to get going. Ingress from Berkeley started a couple of years later as a university project, but there's no software industry. So we kind of got in on the ground floor of that. The decision to not go after, try to solve all the world's problems, but solve, the departmental computing problem. Then the backlog that always occurred. If you were, like I said, if you want to get something done through data processing at the time, you had to ask somebody in IT to write a program and wait some interminable amount of time till it would show up. No graphical interfaces, none of that stuff. It was all, 80 column cards and reams and reams and reams of green and white striped paper.
Yeah.
And also, I think the decision for the personnel decision, how do you hire people? What do you want to have on staff? And how exacting do you want to be going forward when it turns out that not everyone is suitable for your environment? And it helps morale to do that. People know when they're not doing well in an environment, and it's a good idea to let them be successful elsewhere.
Yeah. It's not very often that the founding entrepreneurs that start a business are the ones who carry it forward as it becomes more successful. Yet for Larry Ellison and the founders there, you made that transition. Tell me a little bit about how difficult that was, or what you did that set you apart from other companies.
They think that, if I've looked at the trio of us, Bob Miner passed away in 95 and I retired in 96. So, but Oracle was already a big company by that time. We had
Yeah.
25,000 employees, things like that. Larry is really, really smart. People could make all kinds of stories about Larry, but one thing you can not deny is, of the crowd that was running around at the time, I think he was the smartest of the bunch in terms of seeing where things were going to go. But he needed to learn about how to run a business. And part of bring the venture people in was basically to teach Larry how to be CEO. But, in terms of, marketing, the kind of speeches he made and all that kind of stuff. And that, I think, was a big key to letting Bob and myself be technology guys. We ran departments and stuff like that. And, I had marketing people working for me, as Bob did in his group. Mark Benioff worked for me for a while as my VP of marketing, and I ran the small computer group within Oracle. So, but I didn't have to know about marketing. Mark knew about marketing. That was fine. And the same thing with Bob and the people he had in his group. But Larry had to learn about all that stuff, how to do marketing, how to do sales, the systems you need to put in place to, control those activities. And as we decided we were going to move to be a public company, what that means. So Larry learned how to be a CEO, and that the decision was to, not all try to run it. The committee worked fine, but at some point Larry had to run the show. And he was the one had the chutzpah, Jewish word, chutzpah, to actually do this. Bob and I were never going to be as outgoing as Larry in that regard.
At the highest levels of performance in business, how important is it to have physical and mental wellness?
It's really important. I think that when we were early days of Oracle, like a lot of startups, you read about it now, you have people working these 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. We did that. But we also, as a company, we had a softball team. We had, when we built our headquarters, one of the first things we did was to put a gym in. So we had a gym at the place we had on Davis Drive in Belmont, and we built the Emerald Towers we have now. One of the buildings is a gym. So I think it was really helpful to do that. And we had, once we got big enough to do it, we had all kinds of little clubs within Oracle. You think about kind of the Lockheed model. If my dad worked for Lockheed, there were 1 million clubs up there. In the middle of this defense building, Polarises and Tridents and Aegina and all that kind of stuff. They had all these little clubs for astronomy and for, needlework, all kinds of stuff. We did similar kinds of things, just as employees wanted to form little clubs. We gave them space in the gym area to have meetings and whatnot. So I think it was important to encourage a social life, within the company, just because that's where most people have their social lives these days. And because people used to actually come to the office every day, unlike, say, maybe right now. But, yeah. So it's important to do that. And at some point, we had to change our vacation policy because you could used to bank infinite amounts of vacation. I had 15 weeks of vacation at some point because I never took vacations. I was working all the time. And we said, that's a bad idea. Let's limit the amount you could bank, and people can insist on taking their vacation time. And so we got rid of the policy that you could buy out somebody's vacation because people needed to get away from work. And so we changed that policy shortly after we went public to get people to take time away from work, even if they didn't want to, regardless of deadlines and regardless of what their managers might want.
Excellent. So what advice would you give the younger entrepreneurs today about health and taking care of themselves while pursuing their ambitious goals?
Well, part of it is when I talk to students, I do presentations to students and seminars at San Jose State all the time. But what a great bunch of people out there. The most sort of ambitious group of people I've met. To a person, they want to start their own businesses, whether it's, building computer software or baby strollers. They all want to do businessy things, which is great. One of the things I advise, especially people in engineering and the sciences, is that get a broader based education than you might think you want or think you need. Not every course has got to push your engineering degree or your math degree or your computer science degree or your sociology degree forward. If you're in the social science, take some hard sciences, take music, take some art. If you're an artist person, take something in the sciences, just to understand how this group of people we call humanity think about things, and often they think about things a little differently. And so that's the first step, is broaden your education. Take some time. It'll be useful to you later, and it makes you a more valuable employee or a more valuable entrepreneur going forward, because you know more about people. People is the most important skill you have, whether you're a person in the trenches, writing code day in, day out, or whether you're trying to run a company. You have to understand people. And the way to do that is to understand by learning about people, learning about different disciplines, things like that. But the other thing is to be physically active. And I think it's good for companies to encourage that, go through their health insurance plans and things like that. Wellness should be a big part of that, but also in terms of the corporate culture. It's kind of nice if the CEO is a runner or an athlete, or department heads, and they do things like that. And so they get out and they don't sit behind their desks 24/7 and go home and eat bad food and go to bed.
Now that you've gone a little bit further in life, do you see a difference between financial success and life fulfillment?
A lot of it goes hand in hand. I think that if people always say, "Oh, money can't be everything." Yeah, but it can buy some things. And I consider money a lubricant. It makes life easier. And so if you're always struggling to figure out how I'm going to pay the rent this month, or, how do I afford health insurance? And if that becomes the focus. And so you become you're so focused on money, then you can't be focused on other things. So it's if you can achieve financial success to the level so that some of those daily things are not always top of mind. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of need. The first thing you need is air, food, and water. Next thing is a place to live, and finally you get to self-actualization. And if you look at those 5 or 6 levels of that hierarchy that I learned about in business and organizational psychology when I was doing my master's work, each step up requires more financial stability. So you can afford to stop worrying about levels 1 and 2 because you're working on level 3. So I think it's a big piece of the pie. And sometimes people who have achieved highly stable states of financial stuff forget about the struggle that it took to get there, and they often don't appreciate the struggle that people are going through who may not have the family background, the circumstances of life to be there. And I think it's important, especially for schools like San Jose State, which is have 60% of the students there are first time in their families to go to college.
Yeah.
And that will help not only them when they get their degrees and they go off in the professional world, because they have a better chance of being financially stable. It will help their families. It will help their neighborhoods, their peer group from wherever they live, to see it's possible, that you don't have to give up.
We're seeing a technological revolution again, as we saw back when Oracle got started with AI today. What do you think the opportunities that people may be overlooking with the technology shift that's happening?
AI is still relatively new. We used to call them expert systems, and they've gotten so much smarter as computer software and hardware goes. Some of it is just the ability to use AI not as the thing that solves your problems, as a crutch, but something that assists your brain to do better work. Like I think if I want to be, we talked before this broadcast about a set of music that's come out now. It's completely generated by AI, the songs, everything like that. And in order for the creator, the person who gave all the prompts to that stuff, he had to really think about what he or she wanted. Person's anonymous, we have no idea who it is. But the think about what they wanted this AI to create. And so they used AI to generate it, but as a collaborator, not as a crutch to do what they couldn't do necessarily. Maybe they could do that themselves, but they really used AI as a collaborator. And I think treating AI as a collaboration tool rather than something that, you'll just give it to AI, it'll do it for us.
When people look back at your career, Ed, what do you hope that they remember?
That people have different stages in their lives. And, like we talked earlier, I was not a great college student. But just because you're, not a great college student doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be a successful business person, um, whatever your professional life turns into after that, because you will change. So, and just because you didn't go to Harvard doesn't mean you can't, you're consigned to being a worker bee for the rest of your life. Whatever that is, nothing wrong with being worker bees. There are many highly successful people they never ran a company and they're doing really well. So I think it's important to rely on yourself and understand your limitations, but also your strengths as you move forward. So I think that's just an important piece of the puzzle. Yeah.
I think we can comfortably say that you have been financially successful in your life and you've had an impact in the world with the work that you and your team did at Oracle. How do you rate success today?
Well, I retired from Oracle in 96 because I really, become a big company. It's not as much fun to work, for me at least, for a big company with 20,000. Now there's 150,000 people at Oracle than it is when it was a startups are just exciting and fun. And you work 80-hour weeks, but you don't care. It's just fun to do that. I think that, the success of that allowed me to pursue my other, just as music, but also philanthropy. I mean, the work I do at San Jose State and on the Tower Foundation, to encourage students in the sciences and that end of the professional spectrum, because that's what I know about. But also I do, I'm an emeritus board member at the San Francisco Zoo because I believe in conservation and environmentalism and whatnot. And what people don't like furry animals or scary animals or whatever it is. And the zoo is, for example, is a great, kind of what I call, sort of non-academic education. You learn about science because it's fun and you do it, and it will bring people into that part of, our intellectual space that is science and people who might not expect to be there. And you're not bludgeoning them with tests at the end of the day.
We were having a conversation a while back and we were talking about travel and you said you were taking a cruise. I said, now what cruise line are you going to take? And you said, well, Disney, of course. You have a lot of connections to Disney, including being a Club 33 member. Tell me, what is it that is so attractive to Disney for you?
To me, this company that has built upon family, not in the political sense, but in the real world sense. And people have families of all kinds and whatnot. And they've built a safe place to go. If you ever go to Disneyland, and yeah, it's hustle and bustle and it's expensive, which is too bad that this way it is. But it's always clean. It's always safe. And Disney as a company has a policy of making everything clean and safe, even for their employees. You get occasional gripes, whatnot, but you can't help that when you have however many hundreds of thousands of employees Disney has. But they run if you go to Disney or the Disney Cruise Line, which I go to, nobody is better at handling large groups of people than Disney and making them happy about it. I'm standing in line for Pirates of the Caribbean, and I'm still happy. Why? Because the line itself is entertaining. They've figured out some of these issues. So I just like it. It's a fun place to go and do it. And sometimes you escape reality. I mean, people call it Disneyfication of lots of world. Well, if you're at Disney, you have to Disneyfied because that's their business. But you can just you shut off the outside world and you look at the structure of how Disneyland is built, or Disney World and Tokyo Disney, or their movies for that matter. And they're designed to, if you're at Disneyland, you look around, you can't see the outside world. The only place you can see outside of Disneyland is Tower of Terror, and they've oriented so you can't really see it. You kind of look back into the park when the big shutters open, and the Matterhorn, because you're pretty high up.
Yeah.
So they've done a good job of kind of allowing you a few hours or a few days of escape from the madness that we have, and just have a pleasurable experience with your family. Kids can have a great time. You can have a great time. It's the best people watching place on the planet.
Yeah. The happiest place on earth, too, is what I've heard.
That's what they say. Even if you see kids in strollers screaming bloody murder because and dad's saying, we spent $200 today. You're going to have a good time.
I notice as we look into the background there on your Zoom, you've got some amplifiers, guitar, and right behind your head, that's not a gun rack. That's a guitar rack.
Guitars, no guns in there. So,
so
no, I've been a guitar player since I was a senior in high school, and I like music. It's one of the things I did when I retired from work was I spent more time with guitar. But I've been in a rock and roll group since San Jose State.
Yeah.
3 of the guys in the band I'm with now we went to school the same years. We're all San Jose State grads, and we had a band back then. We played, Beatles and we didn't play mostly Rolling Stones and blues back then, and that the core of the group has been together since then. So we're still a band. We still play around once in a while, and it's Beatles and Beach Boys and that music from our youth, and some stuff we wrote ourselves. So I'm not a great musician. I have my musical stage name Eddie O, which is kind of an affectation more than anything else. I'm too late to be a rock star. So
it's the theme that weaves through everything, because as we started our conversation, you talked about music, and it has been a constant through your life, and now it plays a significant role in after your working life, when you could really focus on the things that are important to you as well. You've got a motto that you have for your life from Peter Pan. Would you share that with us?
Never grow up. It's a trap.
Yeah. And you also said you're only young once. But you can be immature forever. So just keep young.
Yeah, keep young, which is actually it's a tagline from a club I belong to. That's their motto, is keep young. But it's a men's club that focuses on arts and music and friendship and whatnot. So one of the things it's interesting is we talk about clubs like that in the social life. One of the things is people study aging. I'll be 80 this year. But one of the things is people study aging is what keeps people well and whatnot. And it's social relationships. People who have friends in a social life age better than people who don't. So, you sometimes you picture that lonely older person sitting in a room watching television without anyone around. And that just, that will age them quickly. Lockheed did a study when my dad was there. And the average lifespan of someone when they retired from Lockheed was less than 2 years, because they didn't have any life outside of Lockheed sometimes, and they would retire. Sometimes people would retire because they had health problems, and it kind of skews the result. But they required retirement age at the time was 65, and it kind of applied across the board, and that's very telling to me that it's important to stay physically and mentally active.
Yeah. Ed, thank you for spending time with us today. Thank you for the impact that you've had in the world on the technology side of things, and the impact you're having in the world today, just being happy, being young, and doing the thing, following your passions. So thank you for all of that.
You're more than welcome, Kevin. That was just great. I appreciate the opportunity to babble on here. So,
Ed, thank you for taking us behind the scenes of your remarkable journey, one that reminds us that success is rarely a straight line. The greatest achievements are often built on resilience, vision, and the courage to keep moving forward. If today's conversation has sparked a new idea, a new perspective, or simply encouraged you to think differently about success and wellness, we invite you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with someone who could benefit from hearing it. And as always, remember to be proactive, be prepared, and look out for one another. Until next time, be the power of wellness.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Wellness podcast. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at potentiawealth.com or give us a call at 408-288-7886. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Potentia Wealth or Potentia RIA. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Investment advice offered through Potentia RIA LLC, a registered investment advisor.